Dial into tie line 1 instead of 2.
Okay, would you like me to do that now?
Checkup on health.
Do that moving forward. Hang on.
Okay.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
It's the Paulacious One, coming to you from the file room of the basement
Hi, everybody. Matt, can you get up Darius Brooks?
The host, systems analyst Mike Mercado, project manager Devin Tingle, the marvelous.
Want to make sure we can hear him.
Me? Well, it doesn't matter what I do. You can check us out, the Sports Cubicle, Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Central on WCPT 820 Chicago. Gotta go. Sports Cubicle, 9 p.m. Sundays, WCPT.
Santita?
Yes?
Okay, all right, I'm going to start the show. Hang on.
Okay, I need to make sure we can hear Darius, though. Okay?
Yeah, he's not on yet. He's not here. So we can't. Hang on.
Okay, I just need to make sure the callers can be heard, so I'll be switching during the show.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I am Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you today, Thursday, March 2nd, 2022. Can you believe it's March already? What? We're 3 months into this new year, and we are on track in Chicago to have a new mayor. It's making news all over the country, indeed all around the world. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is the first mayor in a couple of generations to lose the opportunity to serve as mayor once again. That having been said, we've got Paul Vallis on one side, we've got Brandon Johnson on the other. We have someone who privatized public schools, we have someone who's fought to make public schools more robust. And since education is really driving much of the conversation in Chicago and around the country, quite frankly, let's talk about public schools. Let's talk about privatization. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this University of Chicago study that talked about the real damage done to black and brown kids, particularly black kids, that was hidden by Paul Vallis. That was what Dr. Michael Beyer talked about yesterday. And we're going to talk about public education and where we're going with it, since that is, along with crime and the economy and other issues, those are driving the conversation in this election. So I want you to call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763-WCPT, and I want you to let me know who you're going to vote for and why. Really, no judgment here, Well, we will be presenting facts, but there is no judgment. So, hey, Miss Wanda down there in North Carolina, and Daryl, and oh my goodness, I'm so glad to see everybody today. Linear Bob, and Blondell, how you doing? Great day to you too. And Carol Crowley, Shirley, of course, from beautiful Philadelphia. You love your Philly. Me too. My Aunt Mary Mason and Alfred Duckett, and of course Holly Robinson Pete and her family come from Philly. That's right. That's how we met them so many years ago. Matt Robinson, of course, from Sesame Street, and Dolores Robinson, who went on to become the first black super agent in Hollywood. And of course, Dr. Bill Cosby comes out of Philadelphia, produces a lot of great people, and Philadelphia Records, and on and on and on. Sending you much love today. Andre, my God, brother Robert Williams, everybody, please call us at 773-763-9278. What about public education? What about education in this city? What do you think about it? You've got two educators who are running to be mayor. Yeah, think about it. Now you have an educator who is the governor of Wisconsin. Education's at the center of the conversation in the United States. So let's get right to it. In Chicago, we're going to have a high of 37 degrees. It will be cloudy. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 31 degrees. It will be cloudy. In the NBA, the Bulls, 117. The Pistons, 115. A squeaker in the NHL. The Stars will be facing off against Chicago, and the Wild will be facing the Canucks. I want to thank Mike Mercado for getting us started, and the big guy, the big cheese, Matt Cummings, for stepping in today. Sending much love to my board operator. Been trying to deal with some health issues, and I love my board operator. Just sending you much love today, too. Residents of East Palestine, Ohio, will get the opportunity today to address the operator of a train that derailed while carrying toxic chemicals in their community nearly 1 month ago. The EPA has ordered Norfolk Southern to meet with residents to answer questions about long-term health effects. Indeed, the rail workers who are working to clean the mess up are now sick. And remember, rail workers in the United States, in the main, do not have paid sick leave. Now, 3,000 of the Norfolk Southern rail workers, 3,000 of them who are already unionized, have been given, in the wake of this controversy, have been given paid sick leave. But I wonder about these workers. So everybody, let's keep a lookout, and send up your prayers, but keep a lookout, because paid sick leave is a very real issue. Eli Lilly, one of the biggest players in the United States insulin market, announced a series of price cuts on Wednesday that would cap out-of-pocket insulin costs at $35 for many people with diabetes. Insulin costs less than $10 to make, everybody, according to President Joe Biden and the research given to the White House. But Americans are sometimes forced to pay over $300 for it. The president said it's flat wrong. Good for him, everybody. The average cost of a gallon of gas in the U.S. stands at $3.37 a gallon, according to AAA, down from $3.50 a month ago. That decline led many companies to end fuel surcharges, a move that has been met with mixed reactions. And SpaceX and NASA launched a fresh crew of astronauts on a mission to the International Space Station early this morning. The mission kicks off a roughly 6-month stay in space, where the crew will carry out science experiments and maintain the 2-decade-old station. A Russian cosmonaut, an astronaut from the United States, two NASA astronauts from the United States, a Russian cosmonaut, and an astronaut from the United Arab Emirates. Maybe we can get along out in space better than we can in the United States and on the ground. Maybe we should all go up into space. Everybody, I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you today. Call me at 773-763-9278. I want to know what your thoughts are about this race. Pastor Darius Brooks is going to give us the good news today. Pastor Brooks, how are you?
Still not here.
Oh, we don't have Pastor Brooks on. Okay, do we have Dr. Knighton on? Everybody, let me know. Let me know.
We're doing that right now.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Call me at 773-763-9278. I sure did want to get Pastor Brooks on with his good news today. Of course, he is at the Grace Central Church in Westchester, Chicago, and just west of Chicago, the western suburbs, Westchester. And everybody, he and his church give out food every Tuesday. Please call their church, go online, find out where they are, because you will be surprised at who is in the line. A lot of people need food in America today. They need food in America, and you know what? There's no reason for us to be hungry. It shouldn't happen. Indeed, one of the Foo Fighters pulled out his smoker and fed 500 people, God bless him, in Los Angeles just a couple of days ago. So please go to Grace Central every Tuesday, and the seniors get a special time so that they don't have to wait in the line, so they don't have to be inconvenienced. People in luxury cars. People are struggling all over the United States. Indeed, many of us do not have enough money for an emergency room visit. We don't have $400 for that. We don't have $1,000 for another kind of emergency. People are struggling. And so you see, into this reality is a dynamic political moment. You know, who would think that Mayor Lori Lightfoot would not have the opportunity to serve once again as the mayor? And indeed, now that the race is over, many people are saying, well, a lot of the problems that she had to receive the blame for, not responsibility, the blame for, because she shouldered her responsibility. The fact is, now people are saying, well, it really wasn't her fault. Of course it wasn't. COVID wasn't her fault. And she did do a lot of good things in this city. But that having been said, people want their deliverables, and the same kind of heat that she got, well, depending upon what the corporate media want to shape, the next mayor will get that too. But watch out for this, everybody. Watch out for this. People who stand for the people get a lot of heat. People who stand for the corporations get a pass. Always know that. Always know that. Because Paul Vallis is running on law and order, he's going to get a pass. Because Brandon Johnson is saying, wait a minute, we need treatment, not trauma. Nobody's calling for fewer police. Are you kidding me? No, but what we're asking is for the police to get the support that they need. Police need psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers and more EMTs, people who can handle trauma on the scene. That's what they need. That's not what they're trained to do. So I think they need to rebrand defund the police, because I never agreed with that branding in the first place. I heard them, I got it, but I was like, you're going to turn more people off than you're going to turn them on. You're going to turn off the lights instead of giving people insight into what police need. This will make police safer to get the supports that they need to do their jobs. Think about that, everybody. So do not fall for the okie doke. Dr. Shanina Knighton, how are you doing today? Okay, we've got Dr. Knighton on. Dr. Knighton, calling Dr. Knighton. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing great. I need you all to bring the volume up on Dr. Knighton just a bit. We see that it's about $35. Well, I mean, no, it's about $10 to make insulin. And it can cost over $300 to buy it. So people are rationing insulin all over the country, and they've even gone back to animal grade insulin because it's cheaper. What is insulin? And well, first of all, what is diabetes? And what are the risks of having diabetes? And I mean, are you more prone to infections? Are you more prone to heart attacks, strokes? I mean, what is diabetes?
So diabetes, there's two types, and so one of them is your body's inability to produce enough insulin in your body in order for you to be able to function. And I'm trying to find an easy way. So I'll be honest, Santita, this is on the spot.
I'm sorry about that.
In a way where it's not too scientific. So, long story short, you can have too much sugar in your blood. And we already know that glucose coats our spinal column, which goes to our brain. So that's normal. But when you have too much sugar in the blood, it tends to cause other issues. We've talked about in the past sugar and its contribution to the overgrowth of fungus. We've talked about the fact that the body has a tough time with being able to process too much sugar. And as a result of that, it starts to impact other areas of the body. We've talked about sugar also impacting the immune system. And that's the body's ability to be able to fight and fight. So when someone has, like, let's say, a cut and they have diabetes, it's going to take longer for their body to be able to heal because they don't have that protective mechanism for their body to do what it needs to do. If somebody's sugar is not properly managed with medications, either oral or, let's say, the insulin injection, then these are individuals that also tend to have issues with other organs, such as they might have a heart condition as a result of insulin being an issue or diabetes being an issue. They might have kidney problems as a result of diabetes being an issue. So you start to see that it has an effect on other organs. Someone might say, like, let's say, why the kidneys? Well, the thing is if the sugar is in your blood and the blood is not properly, because we all made of chemicals, if it doesn't have that right chemical balance, then it's very hard for the kidneys to do its job with being able to filter out toxins, which is how we do, like, for our urine, which is how we end up releasing urine. So, and I'm trying to ease this up as much as possible, Santita, with the explanation. But I think the biggest thing is it being too much sugar in your blood. As a result of too much sugar being in your blood, which is not where a lot of sugar belongs, it ends up causing all of these other complications. And your endocrine system which is where your endocrine system and your pancreas, long story short, tends to not function the way that it needs to.
You know, we had Dr. Faluso Fakorede, who was a physician out of, well, he was in Memphis, but he ended up moving his practice to the Mississippi Delta because he saw something that was very disturbing to him. He saw patients, black patients in particular, who were getting these amputations. And I can only speak to you anecdotally. My grandmother worked in the hospital in food services, and she became a real student of health to the point where she became a vegan maybe the last 40 years of her life. And which wasn't unusual because she didn't really like red meat, didn't serve it, all that, just throughout our lives. But that having been said, he said, she said, watch it. When you see someone get an amputation, they're on their way out of here. I said, okay. And, you have to listen to your elders because they know some things. They've seen some things. And quite honestly, that was his conclusion, too. And he said there were simple tests that people were not getting to blow out blood clots that he started administering so that he could prevent these amputations and really begin to treat people properly so that it could save their lives with those people who have diabetes. As I'm looking at the chat line, I'm seeing someone whose mother lost their eye to diabetes. Diabetes appears to be very widespread in the black community, in the brown community, and in the indigenous community. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? I mean, because I remember like 25 years ago, there was 25 years ago, there was a call across urban radio for black and brown and indigenous people to participate in a study for diabetes. And I was like, this is interesting that we would be singled out this way. I was in England, and a friend of ours is the longest serving member of person of color who's been in Parliament, Minister Keith Vaz. And he has made sure that there are clinics in the communities of color with black, and they have a huge East Indian population. And he said, in our communities, in the black and East Indian communities, diabetes is raging. Is it our diets? Is it the care that we are or are not getting? I mean, are there foods that you need to avoid? Is there anyone who has a propensity for diabetes? And I just thought about this because now they're trying to put a cap on insulin for diabetes. Thankfully, charging $300 for something that it costs you $10 to make, that's ridiculous, and people can't afford it, and people are rationing. Well, people are rationing their insulin medication. So tell me, are there things that we need to avoid? Are there things that we need to look out for so that we can avoid diabetes? I mean, can you catch it? Can you develop it?
It's a combination of those things, Santita, and I think diet is one of the big things, and it's more complicated than what people think. And so when we talk about the unintended consequences of food deserts and not having access to fresh fruits and vegetables and having access to only processed foods. Those processed foods are 9 times out of 10 going to contain the things that can cause spiking sugars, such as the high fructose corn syrups, such as the corn syrup, such as the sucrose. There's a lot of things in there that ends up being good for our body. The preservatives, the food colors, all of that stuff has an additive effect that tends to work against the body, even when you have conditions such as diabetes. When people say, why is it that there are populations such as the Black community that suffer more from diabetes? It is because of a lack of resources. It's because of the inability to have those healthier options to eat and becoming accustomed to what's unhealthy. And as a result of that, that means that our balance is going to be off when it comes to blood sugar. The other thing is, too, I could use an example, and we talked about this around Thanksgiving last year. Our bodies naturally are going to want sweet. Sugar is like a drug. So I think about Thanksgiving. Think about we have yams, we got dressing, or sometimes we got mac and cheese. I can go on and on in regards to how many carbs and how much sugar, and that doesn't even include the sweet potato pie and other things, but all of that sugar just within a short period of time. So someone unconsciously tends to eat like that. So whether that is, let's say, the church community, because every Sunday there are those good meals and there's no awareness in regards to, let's say, cutting down on the amount of sugar that's available to be in food or desserts and stuff, that tends to have an additive effect in the body. And where somebody would have, let's say, a warning sign of having that screening where it tells you that you are pre-diabetic, which is a thing, meaning you are on the borderline of where your blood sugar is not necessarily high to require treatment, but your averages are edging towards the point of needing treatment, then that's that warning sign that your diet would need to change. But if you are living in a community or living in conditions where you do not have the resources or education to be able to change your eating habits, you're 9 times out of 10 going to be one of those people that's going to convert over. I've also talked about it as well, that when we talk about gentrification and the redlining, and where individuals, which I know is in my city right now, it shows that where a lot of the poor people live, that's also where you have the factories, you have, the highways that's running through neighborhoods, so that's causing, let's say, issues with emission gases and all of those things. Somebody might again say, well, how is that attributed, or what does that have anything to do when it comes to, let's say, diabetes? But if somebody has, let's say, asthma, and that person is then needing to get some sort of steroid treatment in order for them to be able to fix their breathing,
yes,
that steroid treatment increases the risk of someone for diabetes. So they have an increased risk because they're using steroids, which causes a spike in blood sugar, and they already were on the verge of it. It's 9 times out of 10 going to convert them over. So it's complicated in that there's unintended consequences and additive things that continues to perpetuate, our community, that ends up leading to some of these issues. And that's only a small anecdotal example.
Well, that's why you need to get with Dr. Shanina Knight, and she's a registered nurse. She's an infection preventionist. But she gives us a lot of practical information that we need. All of these carbs that we take in, the body interprets as sugar. Be careful, everybody. Hey, Dr. Nina, that's her handle, at HEYDRNINA. Let's talk about education in Chicago. That, too, along with crime and other issues, is at the center of the mayoral race. Back in just a moment.
Jonas
Dr.
Pizzito, live,
Knighton.
local and progressive on WCPT Willow Springs is...
Ooh. Dr. Knighton? Dr. Knighton? Ooh. Hello, Dr. Knighton? Is she still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had her turned off.
Okay, no. Please keep everybody up because we do the crosstalk during the breaks. Thank you so much, Matt.
Okay, got you.
Oh, Dr. Knighton, I'm going to call you a little bit later. You know, I have that discussion. I open up that conference for the Black Media Summit tomorrow. You know, and one of the tacks that I'm going to take is, you know, as we, you know, the question that they're asking everybody, I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to get the information to you, is it's been 3 years since COVID, now what? And my thing is, now what? Now what about health care? Are we going to have a real discussion about that? I mean, one of the things that we've seen, what did Dr. Tisha Dixon Williams say? COVID has been a snitch. You know, it has exposed us. It's exposed our health vulnerabilities, right? And you know, it's roll back the covers on just how unhealthy we are in these vulnerable communities. Just how unhealthy we are, and we need to talk about that. And I want to get some information from you, if I could, about, you know, just. Well, you know, it's all in my mind. If you can even point me in the direction of, you know, just the vulnerabilities of the poor in the health system. I know that's very broad.
I think it is because it's so, and when I say it's so much, when people say that equity is here, and because you keep hearing around health equity, and health equity, to me, has so many indications that in some ways it's disturbing that all of these millions and millions of dollars have been thrown towards it. But in terms of people defining it, the money is being invested in defining it versus also trying to think through solutions as well, but thinking about it in a way of which is a complex system. And right now, my frustration is that that's not happening in the masses like it should be. And we need to uncover why it's happening. And I was disturbed because I don't know if you remember, but maybe about 5 years ago, though the paperwork in the Library of Congress was destroyed that was showing the racism that existed within the housing market. So they were able to go, and when sociologists actually looked at the work, they were able to see that someone said, oh, a black person moving in this neighborhood, the value of the home is going to go down. And so they stopped investing in those neighborhoods. That meant that your box stores were not coming there. That meant that your grocery stores were not coming there. So if somebody did not have access to transportation, that in itself could impact their eating and could impact their health. If someone did not have resources, and let's say the leadership of the city was like, oh, well, we need to get this company in because it's going to bring revenue, and it was having unintended consequences such as chemicals, is 9 times out of 10 going to go into those poor neighborhoods. If it's a box store and it's something nice for people with money to have, they're going to put it in a nice neighborhood. So people that don't have do not end up stealing the resource out of the neighborhood, which is something that we also do not talk about, is the fact that if I don't have food, water, I might go and take that from the store if I don't have money to be able to afford it. And when that store is looking at their bottom line and they realize that they can't afford to be in the neighborhood because everybody...
Change the world, change the world.
Hold on, y'all. Got to let me know when I'm coming in.
Thanks. Change the world.
This is the Santita
Who do I
Jackson
have?
Show.
Wilson and McKee.
Okay, thanks so much.
Children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. Well, here we are. We are right down to it. We're going to have Chaparral Wells talking about her event at the top of the next hour. But we are going to talk now about education and this mayoral election. We were going to have Dr. Michael Byer on with us, former Chicago principal of one of the most high-profile and one of the best-performing schools in Chicago, but he has a meeting this morning, so unfortunately he had to cancel, but he'll be back with us another day. But we are talking with Dwight McKee, who was in the Willis wagons. What was that? Did you know there was a time when black kids in Chicago, not too long ago, like the 50s, 60s, where they went to school half a day because there wasn't enough time to teach them? Yeah. And so there's been a fight for education. You know, it was illegal for black people to learn to read when we were enslaved in the United States. Illegal to learn, illegal to be educated. Think about that, everybody. When a whole group of people, it is illegal for you to learn, to be taught to read, to be taught to interpret, to be taught to think critically. There's something about education that is freeing everybody. And so when you don't educate people, I guess you want them to be enslaved. So I want you to call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763-WCPT, because I know when my brother, former Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., was in Congress, he worked with Reverend Frank Watkins, peace be upon his soul, on an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would guarantee every American the right to an education. Equal access to an equal high-quality education. That was the Education Amendment, just in a nutshell. Why do we need that right? Because it's not in the Constitution. You don't have a federally protected right to vote, and you don't have a right to an education. So all of these shenanigans around education, we need to pay attention to it. I want you to call me at 773-763-9278, because it is in this context that we have someone who champions the privatization of schools, that's right, who could become mayor, and we have someone who has championed the bolstering of public schools in Brandon Johnson. So I want you to call me at 773-763-9278. What do you think about education? Everyone's talking about crime, and that's important. We all want to be safe. But we lost 50 schools on the black side of town. That's 50 principals, vice principals, teachers with tenure, seniority, people who worked in the schools. I mean, just, the people who serve the food, who prepare the food, who clean the buildings. Whole ecosystems and economics and islands of economic stability were wiped out. And places where kids went to learn, places where kids went to play. Think about that, everybody. So we have got Reverend Jeanette Wilson, the executive director of the Push for Excellence Education program at Rainbow Push. She also worked for the Chicago Public Schools, and she worked under Paul Vallis. I want to ask her about that. We also want to talk with Dwight McKee, brilliant social scientist, who was also in the Willis wagons. So what does that mean? What does it mean to have these two persons who are really who really are kind of opposing forces in this education discussion? Let me go to Barry. Barry, how you doing today?
Really well, Santita. Good morning.
Hi, Barry.
I want to first thank you for being an oasis for me when I go to work. I'm so frustrated by corporate media and by many shows on this station that are simply Democratic Party promotional shows. But I appreciate your honesty and that you actually have a progressive show and you have people on there who think critically. So I thank you so much for that, first of all. Second of all, I want to say when we talk about education, that's one reason that I voted for Brandon Johnson and I've listened to him on the station. And he certainly knows education, and he understands the link between education and the ability, and I know you don't like the term, I don't mind the term defining the police. Democrats don't like it, for marketing reasons, I understand, but
and Barry, I want you to continue, but also for descriptive reasons. To me, it just wasn't quite, I'm from a family of wordsmiths, and so, you craft language. Words mean a whole lot. And it wasn't, to me, it was always about, now I'm not trying to knock down their salaries or anything, no. What we're trying to do is get them support. And supporting the community. That was my objection to it. Mine. I can't speak for anyone else.
Yeah, no. I completely agree with you on that. I think that you can interpret it in different ways. To me, defunding the police means diverting funds overall, not trying to harm the police. And they're asked to do things in this city, and Brandon Johnson understands, and you understand, that they should not be asked to do. And this is the problem. This is the fundamental problem.
Sure.
They cannot address the inequity that has been in the city for so long, and the segregation that's been. They can't do it. It's not up to them. It's up to the leaders, and it's up to the people to get together and understand what needs to be done to reduce crime. And Brandon Johnson obviously understands that. What needs to be done is educating the children. That is a major step towards reducing crime. And if you do that, maybe you can spend less than we spend, which is more than every other city in this country per capita on policing, and we don't have to spend $150 million paying for their malfeasance, their violence, their brutality, and their belligerence because they're unaccountable. We don't have to pay that. Instead, we could put $150 million into a neighborhood and completely change a neighborhood instead of paying for all the things they do wrong. So I agree with you. I don't want to harm police officers or make it more difficult for them, but we should be spending a lot less of our budget on policing and a lot more on doing the right things for support for the neighborhoods that we have not done over the past decades. That's all I'm really saying.
No, amen. I'd give you a big hug if you were with me. I'd hug you even if we disagree. Okay. So I just want to know that, Precious.
Well, I want to thank you, Santita, again for such a wonderful program and for being such a great progressive and a champion of humanity. I really appreciate it.
And igualmente, for you too. We're all making our contribution in our way. And thank you so much. And I want you to come on out to some of these events. We're going to Rainbow Push is going to be having a debate. And so I certainly hope you will, as we get closer to it, you will consider coming, because I would love to see you, Barry. Okay?
Oh, that's nice. Thank you, Santita.
I mean that. I mean that.
I have been to some of these events. I have been to some.
But you need to say hello to me. How about that?
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it right in person. I'd love to. That'd be beautiful. Okay.
Just say hello, please.
I will. I'll do it.
Thank you. That's right. I'm going to get to some of the other callers. Bye, sweetheart. And drive carefully. Please do not talk and drive. Thank you very much. Oh, gosh. But I'm glad he called this morning. You see, education is on our minds. And so let me go to you, Reverend Wilson. Boy, you've had many lives. You're a pastor, a minister. Indeed, Reverend Clay Evans laid his hands on you. But you've been a lawyer. You're an educator. And so talk to me about school privatization. I mean, and indeed, there are many studies that show how school privatization, using our public resources to create really like a super private school system within the public school system, which really has been anti-Brown versus the Board of Education. Let's be real about that. Professor Charles Ogletree from Harvard used to talk about that all the time. What about having these these candidates who really sit on different sides of the divide, opposite sides of the divide on public education?
Well, I think that there must be a community-initiated plan for education. You cannot expect an individual to plan for the people who elect them and pay their salaries. I know both Paul Vallis and Brandon. I met Paul Vallis at a time when violence began to rise in the city. And at one weekend, 12 children were murdered the same weekend in different parts of the city. And so I called him. I never met him before. He had been placed in the position of head of the school system by Daley. They changed from an educational model to a corporate model, where you did not have to have an educator heading the school system. You had a business-minded or business person as the CEO. When you say CEO of Chicago Public Schools, you're now saying that you have a business person running the system. Paul then created the position of Chief Education Officer, which was Dr. Cosette Buckney, a longtime veteran educator, and Dr. Blondine Davis. Blondine ran the administrative pieces of education, so all of your school regional people reported to her for the, when they requested funds, and it was more of a managerial position. Cosette defined the curriculum and education, and together with Lula Ford, they would literally running the educational aspects of the system. Lula Ford, another veteran educator who had been an outstanding educator, if you remember, in the State Street corridor. She was a great principal, and all of them were great principals and had demonstrated their ability to manage school systems and school buildings and that kind of thing. Vallis was put there when Chicago's school system was at one of the lowest performing, said one of the worst schools in the nation. And so what he did, I think, was put these women in charge of the system to run the educational aspects and to deal with the violence in the schools and around the schools. You had another woman who ran specialized services. So he began to make some changes and shifts in the way the system was running. Now, what happened was there came a corporate idea that we should do Renaissance 2010, and it changed from neighborhood schools feeding into high schools. You know, you would know when you graduated from a certain elementary school, you knew your high school because they were based on attendance boundaries. That model changed, and so you had this idea of magnet school programs, and you deselected the high-performing students from the local schools, placed them in where you went, Whitney Young, later Peyton, and so you created all these high-performing, quote-unquote, gifted schools, and then the neighborhood schools were not treated with the same kind of funding, the same kind of support and resources.
Which
is what Brown.
Which gets us right to this, because there's a New York Times story that's out right now that talks about charter schools, and I need to get right to this because I've got other calls I need to bring on. I mean, because the narrative that Mr. Vallis is touting about the success that he had in New Orleans and Philadelphia, and New Orleans in particular, they look at this, was just false. I mean, our kids did not do better. Very quickly, Reverend Wilson, then I'm going to go to Dwight McKee, and then I'm going to go over to the callers. I mean, because these narratives are just false. Our kids are not doing better.
What Paul did at CPS was balance the budget of the schools. He did a more corporate management style. What Brandon, as an organizer, I met him as an organizer at CTU, the School Teachers Union. What you had in him were fighting for lower class sizes for teachers and for things that would make teaching easier and better for the school system. We worked, as you remember, when Karen Lewis was a teacher at King High School, we began to work with her at Push Excel, organizing teachers, because at that time, the head of the teachers union was more complicit with the board and not fighting on behalf of the betterment of schools and students. And so that's how we pushed Karen Lewis into power. We gave her visibility at Push because she was articulate, committed, and a great science and math teacher. So I think Vallis has value. He has a commitment to education. His design for education perhaps is very different than where Brandon is coming from a labor and an actual teacher perspective. He knows what it's like to teach in public schools because he's been there. Vallis has never taught. He is a business person. He's looking at the numbers. And so
we need...
That can be good and bad. You need an educator in heading the educational system. You do not need a non-educator. But you, however, do need someone that can manage the budget.
Yeah, but that's a problem we have in the record industry now, right? You have numbers people running the industry, and artists can't get...
I get it.
Artists, I mean, I'm just saying, it's not working. So, Dwight McKee, your thoughts on this? I mean, because from this New York Times article, the rhetoric of reform often fails to match the reality. For example, Paul Vallis, and this is from the New York Times, the superintendent of the Recovery School District in New Orleans from 2007 to 2011, boasted recently that only 7% of the city's students attend failing schools. Failed schools at that time, down from 62% before Katrina, a feat accomplished, he said, with no displacement of children. And the evidence was this was simply false. It was simply false. And then you had Arnie Duncan who said, look, Katrina was the best thing that happened to New Orleans because we were able to the New Orleans school system because we were able to shake it up. I mean, Dwight McKee. This was the largest displacement of Americans in our history. And really, black political power and the black community was blown apart by New Orleans and by Katrina. And in real time, we were getting calls at Rainbow Push. They said, look, this disaster could have been prevented. They would not remove a barge from the standing wall in the lower Ninth Ward. And during the storm, the barge hit the standing wall all night long. Eventually, the standing wall broke and the flooding of New Orleans began. So, talk to me, Dwight. What about school privatization? He says, we're going to open up schools, later in the evening. We're going to have school choice. But no one is talking about bolstering the neighborhood school, Dwight.
Well, the problem with corporate structure is that all corporates have hierarchies, which makes them very elitist. And what happens is that, like in any corporation, the hierarchy gets the resources, the benefits, and the lower you are on that total pole, the less resources you have access to. And that's what happens in the school system. You create a very elitist, narrow hierarchy where all the educational resources go, where all the bright, quote-unquote, students go, where those who test high go, and everybody else is stratified, so that everybody else who does not have access to that, who don't qualify, deal with the neighborhood schools, which then by definition reduce their test scores, and by definition pretty much reduce their resources or access to resources, and they become neglected over time. And so the students then become, disinterested or preoccupied or redirected. They begin to drop out, or the parents get frustrated and move. And then it diminishes not just the quality of the school, but the quantity of people in the school. And then that justifies you closing the school up, which then is what creates a deficit in the neighborhood, because the school is one of the major economic engines for the neighborhood. And all the local stores that support the school and the teachers that work in the school, and there's a diminish of all of those services which go to service that institution. They then suffer, and you create a slum. You create on one side of town, you create an economic engine and economic development, because the first thing people look for when they move to a neighborhood is the quality of the school. Mm-hmm. And so that school, that neighborhood becomes vibrant. And the other neighborhoods that you close the schools in become, over time, a slum or a ghetto, because now people who of means don't want to move into that neighborhood, because the first thing, again, they look at is the school system and how poor that is. And so, it's a snowball effect.
Attorney Robert Patillo, this is a national discussion and a national crisis. What are we going to do about these schools? What are we going to do about these schools? And, are we going to educate people? To me, will the average person have access to equal high quality education? Will just every American have that access? Yeah. Robert Patillo. Is Attorney Patillo there?
He should be.
Okay. Well, you know what? We will. Let me scoot on over to Reverend Wright. Reverend Wright, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Jackson, Chicago area. How are you?
How are you?
Can you hear me clear?
I can hear you clearly.
I'm in your fair state of North Carolina and Rocky Mount specifically.
All right.
But I lived in Chicago for many years. I transferred originally from Detroit, Michigan. But I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching for many years. One of the symptoms I've noticed for all the environments I've been in, being military also, now retired military, I still remain a teacher. The devil is the doggone problem to all this, and it's coded a different way. We call it bullying. But the problem and the symptom is the same. The disease is the same. We should just call it what it is. It's in our schools. It's embedded. And I come up through a school day in Chicago called De La Salle High School, and yes. From Wabash, the daily schools, as I call it, if you will. We're doing a time of 1969 through 73. But the evidence of the problem is there then and was there long before me and probably still there now when I go in and speak every now and then. And it's the threats of the bigger kids messing with the little ones, girls messing with the boys just as much as the boys messing with the girls, that kind of symptom. It makes the job for a teacher hard when the kids come to the classroom. In my classes, I've done K through 12. And I find the symptom the same. They're frustrated. They're stressed from home environment. Me, I caught 3 buses to get all the way from the far south side of Chicago and off of Vincennes, caught it to 87 to the Dan Ryan. Dan Ryan had just finished building, all the way clean to 35th. Took 35th Street train off of 35th, took the bus straight to De La Salle across McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And that's where the new police station is at. Now, I look at this. I never had a yellow bus to ride on. So I ended up learning that as a career to teach it. What am I getting at? The kids are going to have to learn a new way, but just change the paradigm a little bit. We're used to books in certain styles and education processes that be preset, pre-laid, or by the doctrine, if you will. Mine being an independent school, if you will, and it did cost money. My mother had to pay for tuition. Public schools, you don't. But here's the key. The education is the format. Within that setting, it's the subjects thereof. Now, I had some teachers there. One of my teachers came all the way from Saudi Arabia, and he taught me geometry. I use that in my flight classes today.
But, but that having been said, I need you to get to public education and what we're going to do about it.
Yes,
because De La Salle, because De La Salle is a private school. I have a lot of friends who went to De La Salle, and it's a great school. That having been said, the average neighborhood school has been defunded. You talk about defunding the police. We're defunding the American public school system, and that is hurting most America's kids. I've got 30 seconds for you, Reverend Wright. Okay.
Just as much as Illinois, just as much as Michigan. These schools are being defunded, if you will, through the headquarters there. We can't do anything about that. That's behind the scenes.
No, we can do something about it. No. I disagree. We can do something about it. Now, and every movement in this country has been a left-wing, truly a left-wing movement. And when we have hit the streets, when we have been active, we have gotten what we know to be our God-given human rights. Now, we can do something about this. Because De La Salle was a great school, but John J. Pershing was a great school, too. Doolittle could have been greater than it was, because I went to school over there on 31st and Rhodes, which now is 31st and Cottage Grove. All the Jacksons went to John J. Pershing Elementary School, which is now a host site for Aramark. And you didn't have classes that were larger than 30 kids. And if you had those classes that were that large, you had a couple of teachers. This was in the 60s and the 70s going into the 80s. By the time my sister came out in the 80s, my parents had to take her out and send her over to Marva Collins to ensure that she would be able to read at grade level. Something happened here. And my sister got a PhD in a 6-year program in 2.5 years. Brilliant woman. So, there's a lot that's being missed here in the name of privatization, in the name, if you will, of gentrifying the public school system. And we need to look at that. Because now we have 2 educators on opposite sides of this discussion. We have someone who has the corporate model, someone who has the people's model. Now, what's going to win out? How are we going to win? Representative LaShawn Ford said, who will win? How will Chicago win? Chicago needs to win. Our kids need to win. Their parents need to win. The workers need to win. How's that going to happen? Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. Okay, please keep them up so we can do crosstalk. Robert Patillo, are you there? Robert? I'm trying to get Robert, but okay, but keep talking, Jeanette and Dwight.
Well, I think one of the things we have to do is, as we look at public schools, the whole issue of Brown was never about busing children around a city or a town. It was about busing the resources and making sure that every school had equitable allocation of the resources, whether it's teachers, materials, books. And we have not achieved Brown because we focus on sending kids to a better school rather than making the school that was closest to them a better school. And that's what we have to fight for.
Well, we got caught up in someone else's fight. Desegregation versus integration. Black people can never integrate because we will always be black people. Other people can pass into whiteness. Black people can never do that, ever. So this was about having our tax dollars count as much on our side of town as white tax dollars, have the same impact on our side of town that white tax dollars had on their side of town. That's all the Brown versus Board of Education was about. That's all. So now we got caught up in someone else's fight, other people who wanted to integrate into the white culture. What? Now black folks are back going to HBCUs. We understand the importance of our culture. We understand the importance of the fact that majority environments create leadership. That's what?
Well, the other thing is to draw out of a local school all of its best talent. Some children who automatically do well early on. There's some children who are delayed learners. And so you leave them in a school where there's no expectation from the staff and from the administration that these children will excel. And so you take the great, best and brightest, you put them in 3 or 4 schools around the city, and you expect these schools to be high performing. You don't have the resources that are being deposited. You look at gifted schools in the city. You go to Peyton, they have a place where you can imagine being in space because they have that kind of technology there. You don't have that at every school.
But but Jeanette, at the same time, you've got someone who has a corporate model, which is not a people's model. I mean, we understand that. You're absolutely right.
But and also, I've taught at every grade level. Most of these teachers and the professional development that they engage in does not prepare them to prepare children for the world that they live in and the world to come.
So the mayor,
average teacher.
So a mayor who espouses a corporate model, and a mayor who wants to support teachers and bolster the public school system. Let's look at that because look, I'm a product of the Chicago Public Schools. I get it.
I am too.
Yeah, I know you do. And so is Dwight. And Dwight was in the Willis wagons, which I think you missed, right?
Yeah. I had Willis wagons outside of Dixon Elementary because the schools were overcrowded. And so they decided, well, you're going to have longer school days. We had school till 5 o'clock in the evening. And each children had different schedules. It was crazy. And so what I'm suggesting is we have to look at what do you need to have in a building, a system to educate every child so that every child is guaranteed a high-quality public education, whether it is going into the trades or it's going to college towards a career.
And what I'm asking on this show today is what candidate is going to get us there. Okay? Because I think we can outline what we're going to do on this show today is outline what we need, but what I need to know is who's going to get us there.
Well, I think we have to outline what we need and meet with both candidates and see how they plan to meet the needs that we've outlined.
That's my point. But you have to outline where they stand and what their records are. Because you have one candidate who said that my record is, our records are what they are. But I've had success, and the fact is the data points to, no, that is not true. You've not had success in educating the least of these. Look, somebody's going to be mayor. And so I'm going to have to work with whoever is the mayor. That is fine. What I'm trying to do is I hear you. I want the vocational system. I want the vocational system. See, because that's what I'm taking us in that direction. What are we going to do? Who's going to get us to where we need to go? Dwight?
Let me tell you what the difference was when we went to school. Jeanette and I went to the same school. I went to Dixon, too. We achieved the same ends. We had a stratification system at Dixon, but it was in-house. And so you had one class that the brighter kids were in. The next class is the kids who were bright but not as bright. In terms of test scores, now I'm talking about bright in terms of test scores. And it went down, it was like 8 different class structures.
In the building.
Each class was based on its ability to negotiate the test scores. And then you customize the teaching to subsidize their needs. Because you had, liking students in each classroom. And then you could structure your curricula around their development. It was very individual. And so the brighter students, you could put on a faster track. And they're the ones that, could read at a high school level or college level. When I was in 6th grade, 90% of my class was reading at a college level. What happened was that because of the Willis wagons, which was named after Ben Willis, is that they didn't want us to
stand by. Y'all gotta let me know when we're coming in. And I'm gonna have the Hochberg read, everybody.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. We have got 2 people who will be mayor after April 4th. Who will it be? Will it be Brandon Johnson? Will it be Paul Vallis? It'll be either of them, so get out and vote. We have same-day on-site registration, voter registration in Chicago. Get out and vote. We're not getting enough people to vote. The minority is making a majority decision. That should not be. Get out and vote. And we're talking about the education policies that will help our children, that will help our neighborhoods, our city, our country, our world. Okay, so you have 2 educators who are running. Certainly you have one teacher, former teacher, and one former CEO, following the corporate model of the Chicago Public Schools. So educators, people who've been involved in the education space, but they come at it from very different spaces and places. So we want to know, what do we need as we look for who we want? We got to get what we need. I always tell you all in politics, before you get who you want, get what you need. Politics is all negotiation. You could end up with Paul Vallis as mayor, and guess what? You might get from him what you need, but that will only happen with negotiation. You can't start off not speaking to somebody and all of that. We're just talking about what it is that we need in our public schools. We're talking about the records of these 2 men who are running for office, and we're talking about how we're going to get what it is that we need for our children and for the people who are working with our children in the schools. No one is more important in your life than your child's teacher, than the person who makes and serves them their food, than the person who keeps that building clean, or that staff. They spend the majority of your child's waking hours with them. So they need our support. How are we going to get it to them? Call us at 773-763-9278, 773-763-WCPT. I want to hear from you today about education, which is at the center, everybody, of this discussion. Everybody's talking about crime, but education is at the center of this conversation. Nothing gets you, my audience, more riled up than education. So call me at 773-763-9278 in Chicago. It will be 37 degrees. That will be the high. It will be cloudy. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 31 degrees, also cloudy. In the NBA, the Bulls 117, 115, the Pistons. The NHL, the Stars will be playing Chicago, and the Wild will be playing the Canucks. Thank you, Mike Mercado, for getting things started off, and thank you, Matt Cummings, for keeping it going on the Santita Jackson Show. Everybody, residents of East Palo Palestine, Ohio, will get the opportunity today to address the operator of the train that derailed while carrying the toxic chemicals in their community nearly 1 month ago on February 3rd. Indeed, those rail workers who are cleaning up the community are now complaining of migraines, of nausea, and of sickness. Do they have paid sick leave? 3,000 of the Norfolk Southern workers, unionized workers, in the wake of this controversy have been able to now secure paid sick leave from Norfolk Southern. But every other railway worker in the United States does not have that. Think about that. I wonder if these persons do, everybody. Eli Lilly, one of the biggest players in the U.S. insulin market, announced a series of price cuts on Wednesday that would cap out-of-pocket insulin costs at $35 for many people with diabetes. According to President Joe Biden, insulin costs less than $10 to make, I quote him. But Americans are sometimes forced to pay over $300 for it. It is flat wrong, close quote. Good for him. The average cost of a gallon of gasoline, $3.37, having fallen from $3.50 the month before, according to AAA. SpaceX and NASA launched a fresh crew of astronauts on a mission to the International Space Station. 2 NASA astronauts from the United States, 1 from the United Arab Emirates, and a cosmonaut from Russia. And those are just some of the headlines on the Santita Jackson Show. You know, we've been talking about getting your financial freedom, getting access to the American dream, which is owning a home, owning your land. Most people in the world are able to buy a house but not have the land. In the United States, that's very different. We are rare among the industrial nations where you can own the land upon which your home sits. Which means if you strike oil on your land, guess what? It's yours. A great thing, everybody, which is why more and more people, interestingly enough, I think, are being taken away from home ownership. Just think about it. But guess what? If you are a first-time home buyer, Team Hochberg wants to help you along with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. If you're a first-time home buyer, which means that over the past 3 years, you have not owned a home, you need to call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. First-time buyers made up just 26% of home buyers last year, down from 34% the year before, and the numbers just continue to drop. It's the lowest number of people who are seeking to buy a home in more than 40 years. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac want to turn those numbers around by incentivizing first-time home buyers, those people who have not owned a home over the past 3 years, with substantially lower rates. Now, you need to call Team Hochberg right now. Take advantage of what they're trying to do for you, because guess what? This program could change at any time. But if you live in Chicago, you need to earn less than $105,700 a year. And you cannot have owned a home within the past 3 years. So call Team Hochberg at 855-56-DAVID. 855-56-DAVID. Remember, you can't have owned a home over the past 3 years, and you need to make less than $105,700. If so, you might qualify for this program. That's right. Call them to see if you will qualify for these amazingly low interest rates. They won't last forever, everybody. They will not last forever. So call them at 855-56-DAVID. 855-56-DAVID, or visit 56david.com, 56david.com, to see if you qualify for these amazingly low rates. Everybody, what about education? What about someone who privatizes public schools? What about someone who wants to really expand the support that people who are working in the public schools get? What do you think? We're talking with Dwight McKee. I'm hoping we can get Robert Patillo up. And we are talking with Reverend Jeanette Wilson about this. And I want to hear your thoughts, because you all have been calling in, and everybody wants to know. Everybody wants to talk about this. And so, let's see. Let me go to Gregory. Gregory, what's on your mind today?
Madam, I am a proud member of a family. My 6 immediate family members were public school teachers, and so when I began my career in 1986, after graduating from college, I taught as a substitute public school teacher in New York City for 2 years. But because of the dysfunction in the system, I did not stay in the system. That would have brought me a lovely retirement after 30 years now, because that's already, oh my gosh, that's already 37 years ago from when I first entered the public school system in our country. I ended up going into some degree-related work, environmental policy stuff. But anyway, I, at that time, thought that there was an idea that should be promoted or thought about taking the students who were the 20% of students who were sort of struggling in the structured school system to schools that would be designed to cater to their needs. But instead what happened was the country moved in the direction of, and the charter school was really just starting to get going back then. I'd like to hear somebody educate us on the roots of the charter school when they first began, but it was just starting to really take off then, if I'm not mistaken, to take the good students, so to speak, out of the public school. Mm-hmm. But then if you don't have the funding for the kids left behind, you have this downward spiral to the neighborhood, as Dwight McGee and the rest of you are explicating and enlightening us on. And I think funding for both systems or both groups or all students in the public school systems is the key issue. I'm thinking, the lotto was supposed to go to the schools and the roads, and then I'm just coming up with the idea of all moving violations could go to a school enrichment programs of your choice, preschool, grammar school, high school vocational training to get the population tied in with this as a team. But I want to just end by saying that when Brandon Johnson in his victory speech getting into the runoffs started to cross a line and vilify Paul Vilas, who may or may not be justified in getting some of that kind of energy, in the public's perception, it's going to be very risky and dangerous for Brandon Johnson to try and vilify this career educator in his own right, a brilliant career going from city to city to city overseas, and trying with a limited budget to do what he could to try to improve the numbers is how people are going to perceive it, and that's how he, giving him benefit of the doubt, would say he did. With
well, Gregory, let me ask you this. What about this, the reports that show, because there was a report that came out of a study that came out of the University of Chicago that showed that, their administration, the Vallis administration, really sought to bury, that the numbers were not as good. Look, I wish everybody well who's going to run these systems, but if the data is coming back, taking us underwater, then we need to know that too. And the New York Times just reported, so I'm just saying, vilification, is it vilification or truth-telling? Which is it?
I agree with you, and I was kind enough to be allowed to call into Patty Vasquez's show last night, and I said he needs to he should, rather than tying him in with people who were supporting him, who were involved in the January 6th insurrection, which kind of taints Paul Vallis like he did in his victory speech. Mm-hmm. He needs to diplomatically critique Paul Vallis's tenure and career achievements without vilifying the man and talking about the weakness of his model and his not being transparent on the failure to get the numbers that he claims that he got.
Well, Gregory,
if he vilifies that man, it could backfire on Brandon Johnson.
But no, trust me, I hear you. No, hold on, because I'm not trying, Gregory, I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm trying to engage you. What I'm asking you about is this. Do you think that maybe he's looking at, because there are many reports that show that the right wing, the far right wing here in Chicago, and they do exist, have found common cause with Paul Vallis. And when you're campaigning, Gregory, you change your vernacular to suit your audience. So the way Paul Vallis, the campaign speech that he gives when he's at Apostolic Church of God and on the south and west sides is very different than the one he gives on the north side. I know because I have friends who've been there and all of that. And we're seeing a cleave between the black and brown and white communities in this campaign. So what do you say about that? Do you think that there's a fair amount of conflation with that, or do you think that he should just... Because I think that by sticking to the issues, you might hear the same speech.
First of all, he's coming from Elgin, which is a neutral ground, as the child of a preacher and the grandchild of a preacher, coming with all this positive goodwill and energy that he should not squander because he's at the beginning of what could be a long, brilliant political career, long enough to be a great mayor for several terms, even run for governor, what have you. So he does not want to short-circuit this by going after someone who's going to be perceived by the public as an educator and trying to taint him. He needs to critique him without tainting him.
Okay, but if you critique, you're going to come up with some things that I think that you might call taint. Stay right there, Gregory. Dwight McKee, why don't you respond to Gregory?
Well, that's why truth is so important in every situation, is that truth does not taint or elevate. Truth just tells. And so the truth of the matter is, if what he says, in fact, the facts hold up to his interpretation of the facts, then he will benefit from that. If, in fact, the facts do not hold up to what he say, then he will become a victim of his own rhetoric. And so I think it's very important that those reports that either authenticate or inauthenticate the net effects of his work are put forward, and let him explain it one way or another, but at least we need to know what the facts are. Now, the other part that happened in education that needs to be dealt with, that really is why the public school system suffered, is that when that crowd of young white folk who had just gotten out of college, when they began to demonstrate because they didn't have jobs and they had tremendous student debt, then what the administration did was they created that Project America, which was a way how to get those young students into the marketplace as a segue to them having legitimate jobs. And so what they did is they put a system together where if you taught in a public school for 3 years, then part of your student debt would be forgiven. And so a whole cadre of young white students without jobs then saw public education as a means to an end. They went inside the school system, taught 3 years with no real commitment, in many cases, to the students they were teaching, and got the debt forgiven in 3 years, and then they went and got what they call themselves a real job. And it gutted the existing teachers who had lifetime commitments to education, because most of them got fired. And it left the students really without an advocate, because they were more preoccupied with coming in and getting their debt forgiven and getting out of there, going finding in whatever their careers were going to be. And that was decimating to the public school system. Jeanette, you may want to speak on that.
Well, one is I would say this whole idea of charter schools really started a long time ago when white parents, most of them white parents or more affluent parents, wanted to have public dollars used for them to create schools, particularly these faith denominations wanted to create schools and have them funded in part by public dollars. And you saw the Catholic schools were declining across the country because many of the students that attended them, the parents could not afford to pay tuition. So if you could create this quasi-public-private model, that became the charter. And we had black people across the country, particularly, as you know, Santita and in Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin led the fight for charters. Now, I think that one of the things that the problem we have with our school system is, how do you have equitable funding of schools? That's just a big issue, the money. You have to spread the money out across every school. And when the formula is based on property taxes, you cannot properly fund the school system. That's why an equal value, a better school system, public schools, because the tax dollars are higher up there than they are in the inner city Chicago. And, there have been different models being projected to fund public education. And that's what we have to focus on, one. Two, there's a shortage of teachers in the school system, particularly now in Chicago. Many people decided not to go into education because of many factors, the paperwork that's being required of teachers, classroom teachers, the lack of support. You have a classroom teacher with 30 students, no teacher aide, inadequate support systems in these classrooms, and too many students per classroom. I was student teaching at Kenwood High School, one of your quote-unquote high-performing schools, and still you did not have the support in that school system. You're required to do student teaching if you want to be a certified teacher. What they did was accelerate, as Dwight is talking about, a model to allow young whites and blacks who just want to get a job. You teach 3 years and you get a decent paying job and reduce your student loans. We have to change that whole model. Education used to be a career that people wanted to be in. You felt like you were shaping the generation of the future. All of us had great teachers like that. We're losing that model, the disrespect that teachers are experiencing from parents and from community. People just like, I don't need to do this. You spend 4 years in college and then work on a master's to be totally disrespected every day, children cursing teachers out, bringing guns to school, shooting teachers. Those kind of things impact whether or not somebody's going to go into public education. So we have a lot to do.
We have a lot to do. I mean, well, so everybody, what do you think? What do you think? How prominently will this figure in this campaign? Let's go to Anita from North Carolina. Anita, you know what, Anita, stay right there. Let me take your question or your comment on the other side of the break. I want you to call us at 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. That's WCPT. I want to hear from you. Indeed, we have Dr. Max Wolf, one of your favorites, Dwight McKee, coming on, as he does every Thursday at this time. And Renee Criswell, a teacher, says, if Vallis only looked at the business aspect, why did he only attack black neighborhood schools? Why don't you call in, Renee? Why did he only target black jobs, not just the jobs of teachers, but the whole staffs at schools which were completely closed? Let's talk about that, because all of that is out here. All of that is out here. I think I hear you, Gregory, but I will, and Barry and everybody who's called in today. I think that I'm not into negative campaigning at all, but I do believe you need to present the record, right? And I think that vilifying someone, truth-telling is not vilification. No, just, phrase it, just let the record be what it is. But the records are what they are. Now the question is, what are you going to do once you get there? So much of that depends upon you. I keep trying to tell you that even when you elect someone who stands with you on your issues, you must then press them once they get into office. Remember, the act of voting is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. This April 5th will be the day that you will have to push whoever becomes mayor to do what it is that you need them to do. Whoever becomes mayor then must do what you need them to do. And you're going to have to push them to do it. You're the one. You're the one who's going to have to do it. Because all the people, and I do mean all the people, who did not vote for them will now become their very best friends, or try. Because that's just the way politics works. Because it's not personal. It isn't. You like who you like, but once someone gets into office, you need them to do what you need them to do. And you'll start raising money for them, contributing to them, all of that. That's why you have people all over the place contributing to Democrats and Republicans, because it ain't personal, particularly if you're in business or if you're trying to get something done. You're going to get along with everybody. So think about that. But let's look at what's passed. I'm going to reach out to Trey LaRaviere. I am going to do that. But we want to talk about education, because that is as big an issue as is crime. Indeed, one of the drivers of crime has been the lack of access to equal high-quality education. Think about that, everybody. More of the Santita Jackson Show. Call me at 773-763-WCPT. Back in just a minute. Okay, everybody, we can still do crosstalk during the break.
Well, then, see, there's some unintended consequences to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is that then there becomes a cultural disconnection between the students and the teachers. You have these young white teachers, 22, 23 years old, who've never been around black children. And the rhythm of black children they find very intimidating. And so the first time a young boy does something that they think is out of order because they don't know how to culturally deal with them, then they send them to the principal or they suspend them, which creates, over time, a cycle of self-esteem issues and self-concept issues, because now the students begin to think they're bad students, and they begin to lose interest in education because every time they do something that what they think is creative, that the teacher thinks is out of order, they get suspended. And so by the time they are in the third or fourth grade, they become disconnected in terms of their interest in learning at all. And so by the time they get in eighth, ninth grade, they're completely disorientated, and so they drop out of school. And so all of those things begin to build upon each other. When I was in school, we had black male teachers, Mr. Baker them, who they understood a black boy. And if you got out of order, they knew how to straighten it out. We had Miss Stratton, who had taught.
Yeah, but I agree with you, Dwight, but most of the schools today don't have a male in the building except maybe the janitor or one of the security guards. Young black males will go all the way through high school and never see a black man teaching them anything in our public schools today. And that's the problem with the system. They're not even going into education.
That's my point, because they become displaced, and they don't see a real future in teaching. And so what happens is that in this corporate model, you have a surplus of male teachers in the school, like Woodside Prep. The teachers there may be 60% men. And so rather than the men be stratified throughout the school system, you may have 70 men teaching at one school and 3 men teaching at another school. The whole system is distorted.
But we have to reimagine what education should look like. For example, American public schools, kids go home Saturday or Sunday, forget everything they learn Monday through Friday, because there are no reinforcements automatically in the community. We have taken art, music, physical education, health education. They don't exist as it did when you and I went to school, Dwight. We had health every week. We had PE multiple times every other day, if not every day.
We had it every day.
So we had the fitness challenge from the president. You had to climb the rope, jump through and you didn't have to be a perfect gymnast, but you had to exercise daily. The obesity that we see in children today is not the same as when I was growing up. We had issues, but we had required things for every child. Care how bright you were, you had PE every day. You had to go to gym and do something. And so we're losing a lot of basic things in this fast-track curriculum. I don't know what it's designed to do, but it's not teaching children. We all have met children who cannot read at grade level. They just are not reading.
Stand by. Let me know when we're coming on. Well, this is the last time, so please let me know. Something.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio. I want you to call me at 773-763-9278 as we talk about education. And, of course, we're going to be pivoting education and the economy, of course, with the brilliant Dr. Max Wolf. But, Dr. Wolf, you know, we just had this, well, it was the election on Tuesday, but it's now a runoff because you got to get 50% plus one vote. The 9 candidates who were running, no one was able to do that. But the person who emerged as the strongest contender, the person who got 33% of the vote, was Paul Vallis, the former CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. Not the superintendent, but CEO, because we now have a corporatized model for educating our children. And then who came in at 20%? Well, Brandon Johnson, former CTU organizer, former public school teacher, and he really surged over the past few weeks. And now you have the two of them. But, you know, what do you make of this discussion? Because we've been talking, Dr. Wolf, about crime being at the center of that is what's driving the American political conversation. But in Chicago, and when you talk to black and brown people, it's much more intersectional. We look at the 50 schools that were closed in the black community. We look at education. We look at access to capital. You know, black entrepreneurs do not have the same access to city contracts that white entrepreneurs do. There's a whole lot of things, but today we're talking about education and public education, and for all of your brilliance, you are a product of the public education system in New York. So what do you make of it? I mean, because now you've got a corporate model, you've got charter schools, but it seems that we're letting the average school, the neighborhood school, just fall by the wayside.
Yeah. So technically, I am also, I guess, an educator, although I teach in graduate school.
That's true.
We have some of the same debates, but a bit different. But I mean, you know, people are having trouble with the basic skills in elementary school, middle school, et cetera, because some of them are having trouble with the basic skills, having gotten a college degree. So obviously, we're going to get the people with the best basic skills making it to grad school because you have to have finished college, and we still have a bit of the issue. So clearly, you know, there's a thing there. There's also something there that we don't talk about, which is in the information age, the basic education that American students do or don't get is life or death for our competitiveness around the world. And you can bet our companies will have and will continue to leave to find talented people if they're not here. So often there's this idea that if you don't let the companies, hire foreigners here, and the imagination that we have, which makes sense, is that they're then going to hire someone here. Well, what they're actually going to do is just leave altogether, right, and go to another country where the talent they wanted was and hire that person there, right? So it is part of the competitiveness and job story too. Look, I do think it's clear in a lot of ways that the education system in this country is under-resourced. It's taxed with way too much. Right? Mm-hmm. So we want that school, especially possibly that school catering to people who aren't affluent, aren't privileged, to do everything the society has failed to do for those kids. We want that school to be the mommy, the daddy, the disciplinarian, the nurse, the educator, the after school, the tough disciplinarian, the shoulder to lean on, the nutrition supply, and the inspiration. And it's quite possible if you pay someone less than Starbucks and ask them to do 63 jobs that the society has failed to do, you're going to have a less than ideal outcome a lot of the time, right? And we also have a habit of blaming the people working without enough resources to do these things, whether that's our public hospitals or our teachers, right? So it is an issue here, right? Even law enforcement and fire departments get blamed for this stuff, right? So got to be a little bit careful, I think, on that front, because it's a old trope, which we complain about these people and it's then used as an excuse to further underfund. So I do want to be careful about that. That being said, we have a 19th century educational approach with 21st century realities and 21st century challenges. And as someone who spent a lot of their life in school, and not because I was constantly left back, it only sounds like you're saying that when you say that, but for a host of reasons, other than just not getting out of fourth grade or something, whatever the nightmare scenario is that your listeners are imagining. Look, I think we have a really outdated curriculum system. that doesn't meet young people where they are. It meets young people where we wish they were in the 1950s when we last renovated this thing. Right? And there have been some updates and some modernizations, but I think those have been bad. And I think that, again, understandably, lots of pressures. I think the 2 years of COVID, we catastrophically failed our school-age kids. And I don't even think we've begun to see the bill for that, but we're going to. And so it's actually timely. And the other thing is we did experiments out of necessity often with new technologies and new approaches, often in a sort of unplanned and herky-jerky manner. But we did those experiments in our schools because we kind of had to in late 2020 and 2021. And some of them were pretty successful. So there's probably a lot that's been done in that sandbox that we could take and run with, right? But this all comes down to, do we blame the 999 out of 1,000 who don't get as far as they should, or do we celebrate the one who gets there? And I think when you have a winner-take-all culture and a society built on inequities, those inequities manifest in the public education system, in access to resources and teachers and teacher training and payment for people in the schools, and unfortunately in the amount and quality of education that young American kids get.
You know what? Let me go to Kim, who's calling from Champaign. Kim, what's on your mind today?
Hi.
Hey, Kim.
Hi, Santita. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you, and we want everyone to hear you loudly and clearly. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, so I know I live in Champaign, but my mom, who is 94, still lives in the Chicago area.
Oh, bless your
in her
heart.
Same home that was left to her by her uncle, that her uncle built in 1929.
Oh, bless her. But you know she's not going to leave that house, so you can just let that go. My parents are elders now, too. They're going to hold on, so let that go. Please.
No, but it's a great
We
home,
are
so
all
I
in the
just
same
wanna
struggle,
know.
Kim. Get out of here.
That's right. So, yeah, I just hope people don't have a short-term memory about what balance, about how he what he did to our school system when he was there before. You can't run the schools like a business. And, we never talk about running the police like a business. If the police were a business, they'd be a failing business. I mean, they solve fewer than 50% of the crimes, and it's even less than that in the black community. They would be out of business if we ran the police like a business. No one would invest in that. So we need to look at both our police systems and our school systems differently. I agree with your guest that we've got to meet children where they are, and we've got these same old. We've just not modernized the way we should have, and it's we failed to show up for our kids and provide that modernization. So, and again, when I think of safety, and people talk about crime. First of all, the biggest crime cities are really in the South, so people really need to get over that. Chicago, I love my city. I'm there every weekend, and I love it. But first of all, when I think of safety, I think particularly for my kids, I think of them having a safe place to live, decent schools, jobs. I think that is all has to go into it when we're talking about solving this crime issue that Chicago has. So it can't just be, that we're only focused on police when it's crime. Thank you. I think that's all I have to say, Santita. Thank you so much.
No, but I think that that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, Jeanette, very quickly, would you like to respond to that before I pivot back to Dr. Wolf?
Well, I think that a large part of this crime is driven by an inadequate public education system. Much of the crime occurs in and around school buildings, and we've not properly addressed that. I think that we have not upgraded, as Max said, our systems since the 50s. We keep using the 1950s model for everything. It doesn't work, and that's the problem. The baby boomers, great generation. We have another generation that we got to educate and maintain and give them the tools they need to compete internationally and globally.
No, we do not have that, Dr. Wolf. We just don't, and I'm wondering if the intentionality is there.
We have it in areas. We haven't made it generally available, right? So I'm also the parent of a very young kid in the public schools in Brooklyn, New York, right? And before she started kindergarten, she went to a private school. And I live in a good school district. I moved to this neighborhood because her elementary school is perennially first or second best elementary school of all of them in New York City. And remember, this is the largest public school district in the country. It's a million kids in it, right? So it's a significant competition to come in first in. And it doesn't have a shadow of the resources that her private school did last year, right? But the other funny thing is, so we have these schools that are just not open to too many people, and depending on where you live or if you've looked into this, find a place to sit down, pull over to the side of the road if you're listening to this. But a good kindergarten in Brooklyn or Queens or Manhattan is $45,000 a year. And that doesn't give you care for 3.5 months of the year or after 4 p.m., right? And so the families that have the means to do that, if they have 2 kids and they have a nanny, they're paying $110,000, $120,000 after-tax dollars to get the basic system that Europeans get for free and Northeast Asians get for free, right? And I made this point before because it was a funny little joke and it's sort of a very dark joke, and I have a tendency to like sort of gallows humor, so hopefully don't offend anyone. But in a sort of heated exchange about the U.S. ability to help the Ukraine, people said Russia better watch out because they're going to see why we don't have national health care or functional education system if they push too hard. And that's actually true, right? Which is why it's like all nasty, funny, gallows humorous jokes real. We don't allocate the resources to provide the best modern education to the majority of American kids, but we have the means because we do, right? And there are some excellent public schools, and I went to some public schools that were free, that were, great schools in New York City that were as good or better than any $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year school. They're out there, but the competition is fierce, and the slots in those schools mean only a small cut of the kids in the public schools get that shot. And so I think, we're at a crossroads on a lot of things, maybe our health care, our public infrastructure, our retirement, our job training, our education, which is, do we actually want to be a country with a middle class and a meritocracy and at least mass access to opportunity? Maybe outcomes will be different, but opportunities probably shouldn't be, or not, because we don't provide that anymore. So it's actually an exciting challenge to go back and provide it. And we have lots of role models in our own history here, because the United States was once a great pioneer in public education, built that industrial revolution, built that mass wealth, built that army, right? Especially because the modern army is about engineers and technology a lot more than it is people. If you don't believe me, brush up on the Russia-Ukraine story. That's drones and electronics, right? So the future of anything you care about is going to be about the quantity and quality of educated people with good ideas in your country and your social stability. And we're not batting 1,000 on either right now. And there's a way to kind of two birds it. Last thing I'd say about the crime, I think Kim said it in her way, and it was pretty profound. And I think crime is also a way to take a moment when Americans feel threatened by climate change and COVID and new technologies and job losses and unaffordable food and unaffordable housing and political instability and a crazy president that we had a few years back, right? They feel pretty threatened, and to challenge it and say, it's young, poor people, probably of color, that you're afraid of. And that's real important to do if you want to make sure that people don't become afraid of the people who are taking their money or underpaying them at work or overcharging them for housing or overcharging them for food, right? So crime is a way to say you are threatened by poor people, probably poor people of color, not a system, not the rich, not big companies, not your lack of health care, not any of that stuff, right? It's actually a 14-year-old kid who wants a bunch of T-shirts and sneakers for free. That's the real specter on the horizon, right? And so it's really a fight about why Americans feel threatened and frightened. And I think a better conversation begins with why do people feel threatened and like they really are at risk, and is it reasonable? I think the answer is probably yes. And then maybe we can move beyond an old trope that it's a impoverished young person of color that's secretly running the world and making you afraid.
Let me go to Anita from North Carolina. Anita, what's your question or comment?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to say that Reverend Jesse Jackson said a lot of the jails have adopted children in it, and we have fatherless people in jail, and we also are having this new wave of mass shootings, which is so-called a mental health disorder, right? Okay, so when Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. was in office, he was trying to give jobs and improve education and make it a right of all people. And the country decided that, that wasn't important, okay? And the governor that supported him wasn't important. So I don't know what the people are going to do, but this is what religion says, at least the Muslim faith says, the ink of a scholar is better than the blood of a martyr. And the Christians say obedience is better than sacrifice. And I'm going to give you the statistics that the universities here in North Carolina is coming out since January. We had 9 suicides at North Carolina State University, and we're getting rape on the UNC campus. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you, yes. Well, that's...
And modernization.
And your point is?
You're talking about modernization. Pardon me?
And your point is, just very quickly?
Modernization is wars, jails, and metal detectors in schools. That's not modernization. And I graduated from college at 16. I was able to get my children through college, and I got married when I was 20, and I had 6 children. Okay, the pressure that they're putting on young parents like that is disgusting. And then to have your children face this negative outcome of gloom of wars and jails and mass shootings and metal detectors in schools. Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. didn't have all that as a plan. And they got rid of him, and he was my congressman. So I'm very angry, and I don't want to repeat this again without moving forward only. So I wish Congressman Jackson could return and help me get this situated, since he's the only one that had the right direction.
Anita from North Carolina. Let me go to Linda from Chicago. Linda, what's on your mind?
How you doing, Santita? I met you at the forum.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad you were there.
Yes, and you look so nice. Now,
thank you.
I'm a retired educated, not the 30 years, because I worked at the Transit Authority, and prior to then I delivered mail for the United States Post Office. I didn't have the opportunity to get an education due to circumstances far beyond my control. I had my first baby at 15, my last baby at 18. My second granddaughter just took the California bar exam. She should be getting the results shortly. And I met the lady there that works with you. That's the lawyer and the pastor. And I saw her, and I told her things to push. My youngest granddaughter is in the STEM program at Governor State. She graduated from the Chicago Christian Academy. Now, and I will be eternally grateful to push and to your father for other things, too. But what this gentleman is saying about the schools and the curriculum, he's absolutely right. But, you've got to look at the quality of the school. You've got to look at the administration, which people don't. A lot of people don't. You got to look at the districts. Your teachers, I've worked with some excellent teachers, and I've worked with some horrible teachers, and there should be expectations of all of them. But there is never, without exception, any expectation of that child. They could come to school, they could do anything they want to, they just serve the kids that want to learn. And I was a special education also. I'm a special education teacher also. I hold a type 10 in that. But these schools is just structured and poorly, and that curriculum leaves a lot to be desired. Some people get in those classrooms and teach. I always taught to inspire and to make my kids critical thinkers and lifelong learners. And I still hear from one of them. One of them is an attorney. She graduated from DePaul. But there's a host of things that's wrong with the public school system. Now, since I was not able to get an education, I come from a dysfunctional house. My father was dead, so it really wasn't a fatherless home. He was deceased. By the age of 23, I had both of my kids in private schools.
Well, what do you think, just very quickly, because we're going to pivot off the air in a hot second. I want to bring in Dr. Wolf to weigh in on what he's heard. Do you want a mayor who wants to privatize, who wants to expand that, or do you think that's the wrong question?
I think that's the wrong question because everybody cannot afford private schools.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what do you want the mayor to bring to the public education space?
What do I want? I want him to. I want a better curriculum first and foremost. That curriculum is horrible.
Okay.
There's no reason why a child, say in the second or third year of high school, especially in the black community, should be reading Beowulf. They should be reading other classics.
But can't they read Beowulf and Alice Walker and Toni Morrison? I mean, should we be adding to the curriculum or taking away from?
I think we should be taking away something and putting that curriculum should be relevant to everyday life and to this.
Well, I mean, I think Beowulf can be.
I still do substitute teaching. It's not doing that.
But I think that it can be. But you know what, Miss Linda, hold on, Miss Linda, hold on, because we can talk just after we come off the air here. But I want to bring on Dr. Wolf because I hear you, and this is something, Dr. Wolf, that gets everybody very emotional. But for my portion, I think that you can read Romeo and Juliet, and Shakespeare, and Robespierre, and I think it's important. I think we have to. You're right. I think one moment, Miss Linda, we have to bring we have to bring a lot of different minds to the table, Dr. Wolf, because we're not well served by the education system that we have. Our children are fully capable of competing and of participating on the international stages. We're not doing that right now. And, and I'm just wondering, how can we get there? Dr. Wolf.
Or we do it, but we don't do it for enough people, and we don't do it in a fair and universal way. Because, again, we do have great universities, we do have great schools, we have some great public schools, right? Magnet schools and stuff like that, but are we doing it for the average person?
That's what I mean.
What it was supposed to be. Also, by the way, is social upward mobility, which we're lacking. When you're lacking upward mobility, and you're also underfunding the schools, or the average student's not getting what she or he needs, that's kind of part of the story. And now I'm going to say something a little bit critical of both of you, and I don't mean any disrespect, but I think a lot of people talk about what the kids should be reading, and if you're in the trenches even a little bit, like I am in a grad program, and I do teach some undergrad sometimes, like we're just all desperate to try to get the kids to read. Kids don't read, and their parents don't read. I mean, anything. So, yes, there's real value to the classics, and maybe that's part of my education, and my family wasn't from this country, so they brought that. Yeah, so I do believe that people should get some classics, but I think they also should get some new classics or emerging classics. But I mean, to me, the challenge all the way up through undergraduate is to get kids to read.
What is the problem with reading, Dr. Wolf? And before we go, I want to send much love, thank you, Effie Rolfe, to Bobby Pope in Gurnee and his wife, Beth. Bobby listens every day, but he does not want to call in, bless his heart, and he says he's learned so much from the show, and then he recaps the show for his wife, Beth. Love you, Mr. Pope, Mr. and Mrs. Pope in Gurnee. But I've got the last 30 seconds. They belong to you, Dr. Wolf.
Well, first thing is, Mr. Pope, you don't have to worry about repeating any of this. You're just wasting your wife's time. But apart from that, we have an anti-intellectual culture generally in a very anti-intellectual moment, right? And I know he's a controversial figure, but if you look at the way experts are treated from Fauci to others, there's this idea that the expert's job is to tell me what I already think, and otherwise the person's a fraud or a liar. That does not encourage people to follow the hard path to become experts, per se. And if the experts tell you that your gun control policy is wrong, your health care policy is wrong, your public education system is wrong, and your public transit infrastructure is wrong, and you tell them to be quiet or you shut them up, it might dissuade some of the scholarly excitement. And the truth is, a lot of kids, especially from limited means, households of limited means, don't believe that if you do the right thing and you follow the social rules, you'll get ahead.
Hold that thought.
That they don't.
Hold that thought, because I want to talk about it on the other side. Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. keeping the conversation going just for a little bit. Love you, everybody. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. But what were you saying, Dr. Wolf? Because I'm concerned that we don't read. I mean, no one, I don't care. I mean, so many people I know at all income levels in America don't read anything.
Yeah, this is not a poor people thing, by the way. So don't read is not a rich and poor thing.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying everywhere I go, no one reads.
It's kind of an American thing.
Gee whiz. What is going on here?
Well, the funny thing is,
to do what?
In the U.S. now, it's more imbalanced. So 20% of Americans read a lot. Actually, it may sustain that industry, the publishing and the written word stuff.
That's not the majority.
But, I mean, 20% is like, it's a fading kind of sliver, right? I mean, it's not irrelevant, but it's pretty small number, right?
Dwight, you were jumping in?
Yeah, I was saying read to do what? What I saw with my kids on the west side, I start with them with purpose. Because
no, back up. Describe what you're doing on the west side.
We have a group of the disenfranchised students. We get the remnant of what's left. Me and Hatch is and J-Bo. We get those kids that have either gone to those who suffer from the effects of all the stuff we talked about. Our kids either come out of jail or they've shot somebody or been shot, or they are just, the kids who've been thrown away and have become the gangbangers and the hijackers. We got about 100 kids like that, and we put them in a program where they stay with us for 9 months a year. It's a residential program, so they actually live on campus for 9 months. But the first thing in my lectures, first thing I teach them is purpose. Because if you don't have a sense of purpose, if you don't have a sense that of destiny, of a calling, then you don't see a need to read. Or because read for what? What is the purpose of reading? If it's not for you to grow, not to take you somewhere. The problem with this good model of education is it teaches facts, it teaches tests, but it don't teach character. And I'm a firm believer that education starts with character. And so we deal with purpose, we deal with direction, we deal with self-esteem, self-concept. We first envelop the guys with a sense of direction and a sense of self, as Eliza used to say. And then they have a need to know to read, because now they know what they're trying to learn. In order to want to understand the necessity of reading, you also have to understand what you're trying to learn and why there's a need to learn that. If you want to be a car mechanic, you need to, you read everything about cars because you want to be a mechanic.
That's right.
If you start with a sense of purpose, and that's one of the things that the schools lack is that.
That's right.
Teaching the kids
who
they are.
Because education is typically the education for the most educated among us has been tied to purpose. This is your key to being a part of the world that you want to have a say in, and all of that. And so education does need to be reshaped. Miss Linda, before we go, a quick comment from you.
Everything that man said, he spoke to. I'm just going to bring it on home, Santita. He spoke the neck-bone truth. You have got to, when children are reading, because I have 15 hours of reading instructions from National Lewis, but that's really immaterial. Children should read books on issues that interest them. if you want to be a dress designer, then you read books on design. If you want to be a seamstress, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you get books on, well, first of all, for a lawyer, speech and grammar. And if you want to be a doctor, you start reading those science books and do well in biology and physics and chemistry. If they're not reading for a purpose, reading has no interest in to them. I love history. I read it all the time. I've learned so many things, and there's so much more for me to learn. That's all I can say, Santita.
Okay.
The man is right.
I hear him, but that having been said, I'm finding when my brother Jesse was in prep school at the St. Albans School for Boys, which is the National Cathedral School for Boys in Washington, D.C. It's very interesting because the kids, well, he came out of public school, and my brother had to go away because Chicago was so hostile to us that in order to save him, my parents made a very difficult decision with my brother at 10 or 11 years of age, and he had to go away. Now, my parents didn't want any of us out the house. But in order to save him from attacks from Walter Jacobson, Fahey Flynn, and all these other media people, and people who we had to encounter, my parents made the decision to send him first to Indiana to school, and then he went on to Washington, D.C. And my brother Yusef went away. Jonathan went away for 2 years. My sister went away too. I'm the only one who stayed here for 18 years. That having been said, I'm seeing when he was at St. Albans, part of their training was to write the Washington Post letters to the editor. And they were getting this training at 13, 14. And they tied their education to purpose. That's my only point, Miss Linda. I mean, I am all about reading. I think we need to expand the classics list, because to me, classical music is not just European classical music by Mozart and Beethoven, et cetera, and Liszt. It is also American classical music, which is Satchmo, which is James Cleveland. And we've got classics too. That having been said, we've got to, and you're right. We have to tie this to purpose. So I'm saying we should read Beowulf, and you should read The Souls of Black Folk. I'm saying you need to do it all. And the reason and part of the purpose is, as my father told me, education will help you to. I want you to be able to be a full participant and a full participant in this world and a full citizen here. And you're not going to do it without an education. That's what drove me. I remember my parents would get us up out of bed around 10 or 10:30, 11 o'clock at night when we were like 7, 8, 9, when we moved into our house. And our next door neighbors, the Fozzards, I think Dr. Fozzard was the head of cardiology at the University of Chicago. White family, lovely family. His sons would be up at 10, 11, 12 at night, 1 in the morning. They couldn't have been more than 12, 13. And my father and mother would have us look through the window. He said, "Look at him. You see how hard he's studying? That's going to be your competition." So just
but that ain't where our kids are.
No. I understand, Dwight. I understand. Let me complete my thought, because I'm very clear that that's not where our kids are. I'm talking about where we need to be. Because my parents had a life that I did not have. First of all, neither of my parents ever spent one night under the same roof as their mother and father. Not one of them. So I get that. And you know that I get that. And you know what my father and mother have been, they have been adjunct parents for several generations of people. You know that too. I'm simply saying, because number one, I said my father took me to the window. Many of us don't have that experience. Many of us don't grow up with our fathers. So
that's right.
My point is, I'm just relating to you, conveying what my experience was, and I'm clear that that's not the experience of many of our kids. But I'm trying to have a conversation about how we get our kids to where they need to be. That's all. Because somewhere in between all the mess that my father lived through, he was living with his grandmother. He didn't go live with his mother till he was about 13 or 14. Somewhere in between all of that, he was able to get something. that made him who he is?
I teach 100 kids. I teach 100 kids a week, Santita.
Okay.
Who have their only purpose right now is to have, and they don't need to read to have, because they can go rob somebody and get.
I got you.
They can go sell some drugs and get. They have no reason to read, because reading to them is disconnected to what they see their purpose is, which is to have a nice car, which they can steal, to wear nice clothes, which they can take, to have great gym shoes, which they can rob. Their purpose is to have.
And what I was conveying to you was, from my own home, that was not my parents' purpose. Most of the money my father made, he gave away. So that's why I was not even connecting. I was not connecting my purpose to any of that, because it was not about getting money. It was about developing your mind. And I understand that we're in a society that does not value that. I get that. I get it.
Okay. And what I was trying to ask you a question is why kids don't read.
Yeah.
And so until you give them a larger purpose, that reading now becomes important, because you've taken them from having to being. Then you change their values. You change the reason. The first lesson I teach my kids is Humpty Dumpty. And I explain to them that Humpty Dumpty, the reason he's on that wall is he's looking for purpose. He's fat, he's dumped. He has no self-esteem, he has no self-concept. Because nobody has told him that he's an egg. Nobody has told him that eggs have life in them, and everything life has is round and bald and pale. And so because he has no sense of purpose, he's on that wall watching the soldiers pass by, because he's looking for purpose. But once people explain to him that he is life, that he's carrying life, his self-esteem changes, his self-concept changes. Now he lives in order to bring life to the universe.
And that's my point. And I hear you, and that is my point. My point was, my father said,
so now they got a reason to read.
No, but that's what we're on the same page, right? We're saying the same thing.
Okay.
We're saying the same thing. I'm saying my parents didn't connect our learning to making money. That was never their purpose. That was never their point. My brothers, my sister and I could all make much more money than we do. That was never the point. The point was to be a contributor to society, was to be a part of society, was to leave the society better than the society that you were born into. That's the point. So, I mean, we're saying the same thing. And so I'm saying that my learning was connected to that kind of purpose. But we have the purpose of our society now is just to make money. First of all, you don't even have to develop as an artist to get famous. You can just go on TV, sing one song well one time, and that's it. Aretha Franklin practiced day in and day out. Roberta Flack practiced day in and day out. Barbra Streisand day in and day out. James Cleveland day in and day out. I mean, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, we can keep on going.
Brown.
Yeah, all of them, day in and day out. That is, but now if you have a sex tape, you can become famous. Because that's the point. But that's where the purpose-driven life, it's sad. And the American society is being diminished because of what our standards are. And I think we're on the same page with that, Dwight. I mean, you just get famous, and you can just take fame, you can take money, we're not developing anything. We're developing nothing. And we are diminished as a result.
Because nobody has developed us.
Shame.
And that's what I'm saying. It really starts with self-development. And when I talk about purpose, I'm not talking necessarily about a career. I'm talking about you seeing yourself, as you talked about your parents taught you seeing yourself as a functional, legitimate part of the universe, as being one of God's chosen people, who God has imposed a purpose and a direction in your life that now you have to live up to. because our kids would live up to the expectations, but also down to the expectations of the society. And what happens when they're in first and second grade is that they have these teachers who are culturally disconnected, is that there are no expectations for them, so they live down to that lack of expectations. The teachers expect them not to be able to read. The teachers expect them not to be productive. And they internalize that, and they live down to that. And so the first thing you have to do with these kids, and I deal with them every week, is you have to create a level of aspirations in them and change their self-concept. To say, this is who God made you to be. Now you have to live up to that.
But that was the point of Reverend going to the jails, going to the prisons, and having talks. That's where he bumped into a Greg Mathis, who was in jail, and who, after hearing Reverend speak, which he didn't get paid for, his education, he used it in another way. That we're on the same page. You bump into a Greg Mathis, who, after Reverend's speech, comes up to him and says, Reverend, I want to work for you. He said, son, you must first get out of here, and you got to get an education. So, boy, Greg Mathis tells you a light bulb went off in his head. He was like, oh, wow. Whew. And he came out of that jail and never looked back. Mm-hmm. So, you're absolutely right. I'm hearing you. I've seen evidence of it. But that's which leads me to, why aren't Americans reading? That was almost a rhetorical question. Because I see where we are. I see what we honor. And we don't honor a developed mind. My father often told me, as I struggled with weight growing up, he said, I'd rather you have an overdeveloped brain than an overdeveloped behind. We admire overdeveloped behinds, not very developed minds. And look at where we are. We are moral-less. We are direction-less. We are spinning out of control, and we're shooting each other up wherever we go, at home, in the schools, in the streets. Really? America has to really regain its moral moorings. We have to. And what we're doing right now, we're not. What Stanley Davis said, what standards? This country has no standards. I have to bring in some of the comments to White. Let's look at the face of politics. It's not just politics, and today in politics, Stanley, you're just seeing the rot that has been there for the longest time. That's the beauty of living in this moment.
Because BET has replaced BTU. That's the problem.
Say that again.
BET has replaced BTU. Because BET has replaced BTU.
Mm-hmm. Baptist Training Union.
The problem is, yes, ma'am.
Wait, and for the uninitiated, let them know what BTU was.
Baptist Training Union is where you learn that church character. You learn that church purpose. You learn that church biblical principles. You learn that church cultural dynamics and black history. And so now everything is being framed by BET for our kids, rather than BTU.
And you know what? And now BET is not owned by black people, because, see, there was a certain purpose that you saw in what Stax put out, owned by Al Bell, in what Berry Gordy put out, Motown. It was what you saw with John Johnson, with his magazines. He really, they all helped us to aspire. When you went to church, you aspired to be like the First Lady. Now many, walking around with dresses as short as, the pole dancer. This is crazy. It's crazy, y'all. It's crazy. And we have got to move things around. I don't know if Dr. Wolf is still there. He might have had to go. But I'm gonna have to run too. But I have really appreciated being with you all today, and I do believe, Dwight, that education is. We're not talking about it, but certainly is it is part of the conversation in this campaign. I don't think it's an accident that Governor Evers in Wisconsin is a former teacher, a teacher who got frustrated and said, you know what, I'm going to run for office. I don't think it's an accident that you have two educators who could become mayor of the city of Chicago. My question is, what are they going to do for education? You know, what are they going to do for education? And the question for you should be, and it really should not even be a question. You should be asking that question, but you should make demands about what it is that you want this public school system to do for our kids and for the teachers who are in there. You got to do that. Got to do it. And we have got to care for all of our students. I think of my brother Jonathan became very emotional, Dwight, at the Rainbow Push Martin Luther King breakfast because he went through his struggles in school. Jonathan was in special education. He sure was. He said people would be in recess and I'd be in the class I'd be in a special class trying to read because Jonathan had a severe stammer and stutter, which you remember, Dwight. And people wanted to count him out, write him off. But he had parents who did not do that. He had an Uncle Dwight. He had an Uncle Mike. He had an Uncle Saint. He had people who said, no. Be quiet. Jonathan, take your time and get it out. And because he had a loving community that stayed with him, I can get emotional thinking about it now. I think of all that my brother went through. And I think of who he is now, but I appreciate what I love about him. One of the things that I love about him is that he has taken that experience and he keeps it with him, so he carries special education students with him into Congress. That's all I ask you to do. With all the hits that you take in life, and we all take a lot of them, take those hits and become bigger. And enlarge the little person, the person who's overlooked. Do that. Dwight, what else do you want to say before we go?
Well, this cause Barry Gordy them went to BTU. It's called Sylvan them went to BTU. That's why they could teach character, because they had character. You're dealing with a generation now, most of them, 90% of my guys, never met their father, or the first time they saw their father, they was looking at them through bars. Mm-hmm. Society is so different and so packed against young black men being successful, because we are the statistics. We are the ones that die by the time we're 25 and 26. Is that anything, the corporate model really would never work, because it's a statistical model that is based on tests. And when when all is said and done, it will become a more elite model, because the richer get richer, the poor get poorer. So the haves will have more, and the haves not will have less. It's just the way that system is set up. And so we have to be very, very, very deliberate when we look at who can help our children on the educational side, because our whole future is going to be dependent upon it. And this will be, this generation, if we lose this generation like we lost the last two, God help us. Only God can help us.
Only God can help us. And God help us. And so, you and I are on the same page, Dwight. That's why I said, wait, it was my mother and my father who took us to that window. I'm well aware of the fact that so many of us don't have that. And I see the gaping hole every day. And we don't have, mothers who are equipped, fathers who are equipped. Something's going on. And whatever it is, we need to dig down and find out what it is and work it out. Because being a young single mom does not mean that your child should not make it in life. My parents are both products of that. That is the biggest falsehood. That's the biggest lie going.
That is a big lie.
That's the biggest lie. My grandmother was orphaned when she was 12. She had her first baby at 14. Had 3 or 4 kids by the time she was 18. But at 18, she got married and built another life with Mr. Brown. And then got all of her kids through college, and then she went and got a GED. Then she went to community college, and then she went to Hampton and got a degree at 61. And then she got a master's at 65.
Yeah.
Because that is what, but that's I mean, not just for knowledge, but for moving up. Katherine Johnson from Hidden Figures was her neighbor down the street. I mean, my grandmother and grandfather worked hard and they wanted to move up. They saw something bigger. They saw something better. They saw something moral. And we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to that. I love you all, but I got to run. Miss Linda, thank you for calling in today.
Yeah,
Dwight.
and Santita, I really enjoyed this here, and your grandmother reminds me of myself. I got my bachelor's degree at 34 from Roosevelt.
Yes.
I got my master's at 50 from National Lewis. I paid my way through. When I walked out of those schools, I owed nothing.
Well, but sadly, that's the amen to that. But sadly, that's not the case for so many of our kids. The undergraduate tuition at the University of Chicago today is $100,000, Miss Linda.
Let me say this here.
But Miss Linda, I gotta run.
Everybody said I would be nothing,
Yeah.
but I fooled them all.
And that's right. And too many of our children, have been told that, and they've been shown that.
Yeah, I know.
And that's what we're talking about right now, because that has to stop.
Happened to me.
But
I know.
it happened to everybody. It happens every single day.
If we wasn't on the phone, Santita, I would tell you something and you wouldn't believe it. But
Trust me.
Have a pleasant day.
Miss Linda, I love you.
And I love your father.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Linda. Miss Linda, I got to run. Love you. All right. Everybody, bye-bye. I love you, love you, love you. God bless you. I will see y'all. Y'all keep talking. I got to go. $100,000. Yes, Tammy. $100,000 a year. Undergraduate, University of Chicago and Columbia. And more of these schools, they're taking the elite schools, which is where you go to meet other elite members of the elite. They're taking it out of the reach of the average person. Yeah, that's what this is about. That's what the fight for education is about. Think about that. $100,000 a year. How are you going to get a loan for that? And when you get the loan, to whom are you beholden after you get the loan? You become a wage slave. You can't dissent because you owe. Only free people can dissent. Think about that. Love you, everybody. I will see you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. Thank you, Dwight. Love you.